So we are very excited to have this webinar on building code enhancement, energy reach code electrification, and building decarbonization, and to have wonderful speakers with Alelia Parento and Paul Poirier, both from Santa Barbara. Alelia is working for the city of Santa Barbara, and she's been doing this for 16 years in different roles, and she's now the energy and climate manager and doing great things, moving the city of Santa Barbara towards climate resiliency and mitigation where possible. And then Paul Poirier is an architect in Santa Barbara, and he's an instrumental member of the Central Coast US Green Building Council chapter, our sister chapter at the coast. And he's been pushing USGBC in the Central Coast area for I don't even know how many years. He's always been there since I've been getting involved in this. So he can tell us a little bit more in his presentation. My name is Laura Gromes. I'm the Executive Director of the US Green Building Council Central California. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in the Central Valley with the mission to transform the way our buildings and communities are built, designed, and operated. And we have educational seminars, we do community outreach, and we are getting ready to do a hands-on green building project in collaboration with the local tribes, and we'll be starting the planning process for an Indigenous Environmental Resource Center at the San Joaquin River. So we're very excited for this new and upcoming project. I would like to give some space for Ellen Moore to introduce herself. Ellen is with the Association for Environmental Professionals here in the Central Valley. Ellen, tell us a little bit about your organization, and thank you for co-sponsoring this presentation with us.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura. Very happy to co-sponsor this virtual Lunch and Learn event with USGBC. As mentioned, my name is Ellen Moore. I am the co-vice president of programs for the Central Chapter of AEP. For those of you who don't know, AEP stands for Association of Environmental Professionals, and our members are public and private sector professionals who implement the California Environmental Quality Act, aka CEQA. The Central Chapter of AEP serves the counties of Madera, Merced, Fresno, Kings, Tulare, Mono, Inyo, and Kern. The Central Chapter of AEP holds multiple educational events per year, and next year our chapter is hosting the 2021 state conference at the Tenaya Lodge in Yosemite, which will be very exciting. And if you're interested in learning more about AEP or reaching out, please feel free to contact me. And I work with the city of Reedley. I'm from a public agency. Again, we're happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce ourselves. Thank you again. Look forward to the presentation.
Thank you so much, Alan. And the Tenaya Lodge is LEED certified, so you're holding it at the right spot, as you probably already know.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Alelia, I'm going to give you the space. Yeah, you can share your presentation, and I look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Laura and Ellen and everyone. It's very exciting to be here and share with you the journey that the city of Santa Barbara has been on with building electrification reach codes. So as Laura mentioned, I'm Alelia Parento, and I am the Energy and Climate Manager for the city. And let me just see if I can advance a slide here. There we go. Just a quick intro to what the Energy and Climate Division does. We're housed within the Sustainability Department of the city, and we do all sorts of things related to energy and climate. So we work towards the council's renewable energy goals. They have a carbon neutrality goal by 2035, which is basically tomorrow. We work on climate adaptation, such as sea level rise and wildfire mitigation. We work on a regional scale to try and maximize our impact, and then we implement energy and climate projects such as renewable energy assets and electric vehicle infrastructure. We have established a campaign called the Together to Zero campaign, which is all in support of that carbon neutrality target. And we're working within our community to try and make sure we meet that target. So we are aiming for zero. As everyone on this call is likely aware, we have significant climate change happening. And in California, we have a carbon neutrality goal by 2045, and our council decided that was not fast enough and they wanted to go even faster. So they've set their goal by 2035. We're already seeing local climate change impacts in Santa Barbara. We have our increased fire season, prolonged droughts, which we're entering into another one now. Significant temperature increases. In fact, Ventura and Santa Barbara counties have seen the highest rise in temperature in the country over the last 100 years. And even changes to our biodiversity. So this is a big issue and one that we're taking very seriously. And so in order to meet that carbon neutrality goal, we have to look at where our emissions are coming from. And in Santa Barbara, we have two and the main sources of emissions and a small third. The largest for all of us is transportation at almost 60%. And then energy comes in at almost 40%. And in California, building energy use accounts for about 25% of emissions, but in Santa Barbara, it's closer to 40% because we don't have other heavy industry, et cetera. We just use energy in buildings. So that creates a really big opportunity for us. And our energy use in buildings is split almost evenly between natural gas and electricity. One thing I should mention, I can't remember if I have a slide on this, is we are establishing what's called a community choice energy entity, which is sort of taking California by storm, where we are taking over the procurement of electricity from Southern California Edison. And we have committed, our council has committed to opting everyone in at a 100% carbon-free electrical portfolio. What that means is that this electricity portion becomes carbon-free essentially overnight as those contracts take place. And that leaves this huge opportunity of transitioning this natural gas portion towards electricity and being carbon-free as well. So achieving carbon neutrality, there's no one silver bullet. We understand we're gonna have to have a mix of activities that get us there. But one of our big opportunities and what we're talking about today is building decarbonization. Because as we just saw, it's got a big impact and it provides a pathway towards carbon-free electrical use. So as I mentioned, buildings are a significant source of emissions, and especially because they're long-term assets. So when you build a building, you're locking in not only that infrastructure for decades to come, but the associated emissions of each of those buildings. Plus, significant advances in technology make this transition not only possible, but attractive. We have new appliances that I'll go over in a moment that make this significantly better than the gold medallion buildings of the 80s that everyone likes to point back to as a failure of electric buildings. As I mentioned, we are currently, as a state, decarbonizing electricity, and in Santa Barbara much more rapidly with the implementation of Santa Barbara Clean Energy. And so this chart just shows you, if you were to transition to an all-electric building today, you would realize a 45% savings on greenhouse gas emissions. But as that mix becomes more and more carbon-free electricity, you can almost completely eliminate the GHG emissions. Why I say almost is the refrigerants that are related to a lot of electrical equipment still produce some emissions that we haven't figured out how to eliminate yet. So you can see in Santa Barbara, we're meeting that much sooner than 2050. We'll be there in 2022 as we finish out our implementation of Santa Barbara Clean Energy. The gas company has been very active in the renewable natural gas space, where they're converting biogas and other methane sources into natural gas for the pipeline. And they're sort of touting this as their response to emissions reductions. This is a great avenue for a lot of our harder to reach or harder to solve applications. But in terms of building energy use, there's just not enough supply of biogas available to create the RNG needed. So it's, again, a really, really good application for like freight or heavy industry that are harder to electrify because of the load size, but not so much for our small residential or commercial use. Also, it does not solve for pipeline leakage, which is one of the significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions related to the natural gas pipeline. They're also looking at blending in some hydrogen into the pipeline, which is also promising, but there's severe limitations on how much hydrogen you can blend into the pipeline before you need a complete overhaul of pipeline infrastructure. So about 5 to 15% hydrogen can be blended in before the pipeline itself needs to be replaced. And a full transition to hydrogen would actually require not only the pipeline replacement, but also appliance replacements in your home. So it's not the solution to the natural gas problem. So what is our opportunity? Well, as many of you probably know, local jurisdictions can implement what are called reach codes or stretch codes or building code amendments, where we are able to adopt something that is more stringent than the Title 24 Energy Code requirements. We are allowed to allow for exemptions based on our local building stock and our political will. And there is a requirement that these reach codes must be cost effective. You cannot be implementing something that creates a cost burden on the consumer. And this is why we're focusing on new construction, and I'll go into that in a little bit. So the impact of reach codes, especially because we're only looking at new construction, is a little bit nuanced, right? We're not going back to our big opportunity, which is all of our existing building stock, because it's not cost effective. But in new construction, it is. And so you see over time, you have kind of a slow adoption as you're creating the market transition, and you're sending the market signal to the industry to start developing these technologies and making them prime time to allow for the existing building adoption, which is a steeper slope here on the right side of the graph. So we're basically preparing the market for the big opportunity, which is existing buildings. So cost effectiveness, the reason why new construction is cost effective is because you're not installing the gas infrastructure from the main and the street to the building and then up through the building. You're only doing the electric service. Additionally, new construction would not require a panel upgrade, which can be very costly because you're designing it appropriately in the first place. Additionally, there are appliance efficiencies when you go to all electric, especially as more and more homes require air conditioning, especially where you all are located, because air source heat pumps can provide both air conditioning and heating. And so you're only buying one appliance instead of two. Additionally, there's a solar mandate on California new construction, residential new construction, that requires the entire electrical load of a mixed fuel building to be covered by solar, which is about 50% of the electrical load of an all-electric building. And so you're already gaining a significant amount of efficiency there by being able to produce half of the power you need on site, which is really sort of an innovative approach to cost effectiveness. And so you're able to not only produce that power, but in some cases generate revenue and certainly offset costs that way. So I have this slide in here because I'm reusing a presentation that was to our community, and a lot of misinformation was spread by opponents of the REACH code that said we were going to come in and take natural gas infrastructure out of existing buildings. So I actually had this slide in 3 times on that presentation, but I've just left it in once. So this is only new buildings. Alterations, remodels, additions, ADUs that are attached are not impacted by this. ADUs that are detached are impacted by this. And that was important to our council to build those right from the get-go. So for existing buildings, we get this question all the time. Well, new buildings, in Santa Barbara, we literally build 20 new buildings a year. It's very infrequent. We're a fairly built out city. So why do this when the opportunity is with existing buildings? Well, existing buildings have to be different. Again, there's that cost effectiveness piece where it's much more expensive to transition an existing building because you have those infrastructure requirements, right? You have the panel upgrade generally to accommodate the new appliances. Plus, in an existing building, appliances are not generally sunsetting at the same time. And so you would inevitably be retiring appliances before their end of useful life, which creates a cost burden as well. And so instead, we're going to approach that through an incentive and an education program where we're helping people find that transition. So all electric is different today. I made a little passing comment about gold medallion homes, and I think that's important because people remember electric construction very specifically, and it's not what we're discussing today. So there are brand new appliance technologies that have made this much more feasible to undertake. I'm going to go through those really quickly. So people think of electric cooking and they think of these scary, scary devices with the coils on top that heat super unevenly, but that's not what we're talking about in this day and age with electric cooking. Nowadays, we have induction cooktops, which are incredibly consistent and controllable. They have improved air quality, significantly improved air quality, and you can't burn yourself on them because they stay cool to the touch and they conduct through magnets in the surface. They're actually swiftly becoming a chef's preference because of that controllability and the fact that you can boil water at least 3 times the pace of a natural gas stove. And again, as you can see from this picture, all of the major manufacturers of cooking appliances are making an induction version, including the high-end versions like Viking and Wolf. And then when people, especially in California, think of electric space heating, they think of this scary thing here, this electric resistance heater that's in the wall, or baseboard resistance heating. And that is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about air source heat pumps that have half of the unit located outside of the building and the rest inside. And they provide both heating and cooling and are about 400 times more efficient than a natural gas furnace. So even though electricity costs more on a per unit scale, you are so much more efficient with the air source heat pump that you're actually realizing a cost savings over time. Water heating, same thing. The people who are remembering those old all-electric homes are thinking of all-electric resistance, which is actually effective at heating water, but very, very expensive to do so. And so nowadays we're talking about hybrid heat pump water heaters, which are much more energy efficient, and they do come with a small amount of resistance backup for when you have high demand periods where maybe you have 5 people taking a shower in a row, or some huge laundry marathon that you're doing, and so they can kick it up a notch and give you that on-demand hot water heating. And the nice thing about these is that they're inherently energy storage devices. So if the power were to go out, these would store hot water for a significant amount of time, which could be used throughout your home. And then this one's a tricky one. Electric fireplaces it's still, a transitional technology, and I'm not going to pretend that even the upgraded version I'm about to show you is good enough, but it's better than it used to be. And so when we think of electric fireplaces, we think of this sort of cheesy one up to the left here that has the plastic logs and the faux lighting behind it. And it is pretty amazing the advances that have happened in the electric fireplace space, where now they're using actual video footage and holograms and real sounds to create a slightly more realistic experience. But I will admit that there is room to improve on these still. So comparing efficiency, because all the time people say, but electricity is so much more expensive than natural gas, my bill is going to skyrocket. And that is true. Electricity per BTU is more expensive. Sorry, not per BTU, per kilowatt hour is more expensive. But you're using so much less energy with these appliances that it works out. So for example, when we are comparing a standard natural gas furnace to an air source heat pump, you can see from this chart that BTU by BTU, they cost the same. And so that is really important to keep in mind as you're going through these design iterations and figuring out the cost effectiveness. Some folks have asked us if it's too soon, especially since in our area, we're subject to public safety power shutoffs related to wildfires and winds, or even grid reliability challenges. And they really question whether our grid can handle this. And it comes as a surprise to a lot of people that 25% of US homes are actually already electric. And that number has significantly risen over the last decade, where more and more folks are transitioning off of propane, natural gas, and heating oil. And so that's really promising. And additionally, and I think this is a really important benchmark when we talk about affordability and grid reliability, affordable housing projects around the country, including the 2 largest affordable housing developers in California, are successfully building all electric construction cost effectively. And so I think that's a big testament to how this movement is going. And so the grid in Santa Barbara, we're very concerned about our grid and whether it can accept all this additional load. And so it's important to remember that at least here, and this might be a little bit different for where you're located if there's more cooling load, here our system is very much summer peaking. Actually, that would be the same for you, because that is when the cooling load is heavy. And so the all electric construction would actually shift the demand increase to winter when there's the space heating and water heating requirements. And so the grid is built to that summer peaking capacity, and therefore there's a lot of room, and it actually helps grid reliability to flatten that out throughout the year. Additionally, as I mentioned, community choice energy or aggregators are coming around, and they're standardizing on carbon-free energy, and they're building the assets, the generators throughout the state to supply additional carbon-free and renewable content. And so it's actually enhancing the grid reliability. And here in Santa Barbara, we're heavily focused on bolstering our local energy assurance efforts by building those assets ourselves to back up the grid. Also, the grid of tomorrow is smart. We're already seeing this starting to take shape, where the grid is dynamic and it's using your building or your vehicle or your business as a virtual power plant. And so it's able to use all of these smart systems together to flatten the grid load profile. And so if there is a spike in demand on the grid, it can access your on-site storage or your car, if you've allowed it to help offset some of that increased capacity. And so this transition to all electric ultimately will actually help grid reliability as we take on these innovative challenges. And it is also important to note that when the power does go out, most modern gas appliances won't work without electricity. They need it for their ignition, and they need it for exhaust of indoor air pollutants. And so it's really important to keep that in mind when people say, well, what if the power went out? Your gas stove is probably the exception, that you could light it with a match, but then you would not be ventilating. And so that would be a concern. Additionally, if there's a system-wide outage, like a transmission line outage for electricity, it's much faster to reinstate than if there's a pipeline outage in the natural gas system. So it's weeks versus months. In fact, there's pipelines in the natural gas system for SoCalGas that have been out for over a year. And so it's in terms of larger scale of infrastructure, it's much easier to reinstate. And really, our opinion is the best approach is to transition off of the natural gas system and build as many renewable generation assets and storage as we can here locally. And so resilience, again, all of these pieces about grid reliability build up to resilience. And we think that we can better improve resilience here by focusing on energy efficiency and making buildings as energy efficient as possible, and then plugging them into the local energy supply with innovative technologies and battery storage. There are some ancillary benefits to transitioning away from natural gas, and one is avoiding investment into a carbon-intensive system. In fact, in areas where there are dual fuel utilities like PG&E, where it controls electrical and natural gas, they're very much in support of a transition to all electric because they see the diminishing need for the natural gas system, and they'd rather not keep investing in it and focus on the electrical side. There are also some significant public health improvements. In fact, several recent studies found that there's a 42% increased chance of asthma in children in homes with indoor natural gas use. So that's significant. Of course, there's the reduced impacts of climate change and all of the adaptation that we're having to do related to that. And there's a benefit in terms of transitioning green jobs and creating solar jobs, wind jobs, battery storage jobs, etc. So there's some economic development opportunity there. And that's all I have, but I think we're holding questions to the end. Is that right, Laura?
Yes. If you have any questions that you want to get out now, put them in the chat and Alelia can address them afterwards. But now we're first going to go to Paul Poirier. And Paul, if you can share your presentation and turn on your video, and then we'll just go seamlessly into yours.
Great. Let me get my camera on too. All right. Okay, so I'm Paul Poirier. I'm an architect in Santa Barbara. I'm the past AIA California Committee on the Environment Chair, the past president of AIA Santa Barbara, and the USGBC chapter here on the Central Coast. I have my own little firm here in Santa Barbara. We do commercial and residential projects. And I wanted to walk you through a case study of a project we did in Solvang, California, that's all electric. But first, let me talk about Santa Barbara. We have a group here, the Community Environmental Council, who wrote this document around the year 2003, 2004, about creating a new energy direction for our county. And they looked at what are the energy uses that we're currently using, and what fuels do we want to use, and how are those fuels being used, and how much of that energy is going to useful energy use versus lost energy via heat and other sorts of wasted energy. So we looked at it, and there was a little bit of renewables happening in the early 2000s, a lot of fossil fuels, coal, nuclear, and natural gas, aviation fuel, diesel, and gasoline. And they envisioned where they wanted to go by the year 2030 by making the renewable energy portion of the portfolio for our county more robust, to pick up most of the building sector loads, and also to pick up some of the transportation loads through electric vehicles. So this is the direction we're headed to now. It's the year 2021, and we haven't quite got the building sector electrified enough. And so we're really focusing on trying to do that so that we can make a big difference for climate change. We really see this as the future. AIA California has been advocating to eliminate fossil fuels from the building sector. There's 42 jurisdictions in the state that have adopted electrification goals. And here on the Central Coast, the city of Santa Barbara, San Luis, Ojai, and soon to be Carpentry and Goleta are moving forward to adopt electrification goal by the year 2035. So San Luis and Ojai have already adopted that goal, but we're trying to get all the cities here in alignment to try to, for new construction, to get them to electrify their buildings. So let me show you this little project we did. It's a little bit over 9,000 square feet. It's a 2-story building for the U.S. Forest Service. It was surprisingly leased to the Forest Service, so the development was for a private developer. Here's the lower level. It has a lobby where you'd come in and a large conference area, and then you get into kind of a big area of cubicles and little breakout rooms, men's and women's shower, because these folks go back into the backcountry and inspect the forest and look for wildlife. They have a workshop where they have chainsaws and maps and things stored in there. And then the upper level, some administrative offices and a bunch of other cubicles and individual rooms for things. And this is the exterior of the building. This is the south elevation, so there's a good exposure to the sun and a lot of roofs that were facing south. And it was a remodel of an existing building. There was about maybe 6,000 square feet in this existing 2-story building that had been used for retail and office. And we did an addition to build an elevator to get ADA access to both levels. And during the process, there was no gas run to the existing building. So we debated whether we would run a gas line over or go all electric and save the money for the gas main and meter setting. And we decided to go all electric on the building as the economical choice, as well as the ability to lower the operating costs once we got the whole package together. So this building became a zero fossil fuel using building in Solvang, California. So here's some photos of the finished building on the outside. Looks very nice, but it's the inside that really is making the difference. So looking at the specific systems, the things we needed to do was to look at the hot water heating. We did not use a heat pump water heater, but we used the standard electric water heater, which uses a little more electricity, not quite as efficient, but it was located right next to the showers we had downstairs and was sufficient to meet the demands that we had for the building. This is the mechanical plan, which looks upon initial inspection much like a normal sort of mechanical plan for a commercial building like this. But we did put a energy recovery ventilator in that brings fresh air from the outside into the building and exhausts air from inside to the out, but it goes through a heat exchanger, so it's either scrubbing off cool air and cooling the incoming air during the summer, or preheating the air as it comes into the building in the winter, and then that air is distributed into all the offices so that every room has fresh air. So it kind of works like this, where you're bringing air in from the outside and you're pumping air out of the building after it goes through the heat exchanger to conserve energy. Also removing humidity, depending on the time of year. So this is the mechanical system we looked at before, but I highlighted the different systems. So the green lines are the ERV. So the ERV is sitting over here above the ceiling, pulling air in off the roof and distributing air off the roof. And it's basically pumping air out in the green lines out to the different offices. There's a conference room over here and some individual offices over here. They all have a little outlet for fresh air. The purple is the return to the ERV. So it's a separate mini ducted kind of system. Like all these duct sizes are 6 inches, which is much smaller than a normal HVAC system would have. And then we have 2 types of units, ducted fan coil units, that either are ducted like this large one at the top that has these red ducts coming out for supply and return, or these little cassette units that basically return off the bottom and shoot the air out the sides. So there's no need for any ductwork. Each one of these zones can be having its own thermostat and be individually controlled with the sort of system we had, which leads to a higher energy efficiency. So the way a fan coil works is basically it takes air in on one end, either through a duct, return duct, or directly into the unit. It heats or cools the air depending on the demand, and then it shoots it out via a diffuser. All of these are tied to an exterior heat pump. But the unique thing about a VRF system is that it's a variable refrigerant flow. It can circulate only the minimum amount of refrigerant needed during a single heating or cooling period. So one room can be asking for cooling, another room can be asking for heating, and another room it can be off. And the system adjusts on the outside to only meet the demand of the individual units on the interior. So you have higher control of temperature in various rooms. One room could be on the sunny side of the building, the other one's on the cold side, and you can address interior comfort independently. Here's what one of the cassette units looks like that goes into the ceiling. In a T-bar ceiling, it takes up the space of about a little bit bigger than a standard return register, but it's doing both return and supply. And this is what a ducted system would look like in a typical building where you're having a fan coil supplying the air out and returning into a different plenum. So again, here's the system with the cassette units being yellow, the ducted unit also yellow, but with the red ducting coming off of it. And then the ERV, the energy recovery ventilator, they're providing fresh air for all the units. So if we look at our Title 24 calculations, you can see what the standard design budget for the building was. 45 megawatts per hour was allowed. We exceeded that by going all electric with 52.1 megawatts per hour. And we had a budget of 86.9 millibTUs, but we didn't use any. So even though we went over the budget for the electrical, we were under the overall budget for PEUI for this project, projected energy use intensity. So we then went, after we crushed our energy use down, went and met with a solar consultant who figured out how much power we could pull off of our south-facing roofs. We added that to the equation to show how it comes out, including the solar, at 81% reduction in energy use from the baseline of 74 kilobTUs per square foot per year. So this project met the 2030 commitments goal of an 80% reduction in energy use, and also was not using any fossil fuels, so it's all electric. This is from the 2030 commitment. For those of you that work at offices that are doing that, you put in your portfolio data and it compiles it for the annual year, and it shows you how the performance of all the buildings that you're doing that annual year, how they work together. These are some shots of the interior of the space with a lot of natural daylighting, lighting controls that go on and off. You can see the temperature is controlled by the thermostat in each individual room. It can be off if it's not being used. It can be heating, it can be cooling, and all of those things can all happen at the same time, unlike a centralized system. These are some other interior shots of the daylighting effect in the office space. So let's talk about the last aspect of going all electric that we did not have in that commercial building, which is cooking. So the Sacramento Municipal Utility District did a study before and after using an induction cooktop about people's reluctance to go to one, and after they used one, how they felt. And obviously it's quite a different cooking experience. It's not like the old coil like Alelia alluded to, but it's actually pretty efficient. And Consumer Reports writes the top 10 rated cooktops in general are all induction cooktops. And interior cooking, residential or commercial, leads to indoor air quality degradation. So by eliminating the combustion of fossil fuels inside the building, you're making the air quality inside much better. Here's some big commercial kitchens that have converted over to induction, and they're happy with it. And actually, McDonald's and Wendy's have all electric prototypes that they're rolling out, because they're onto the fact that not running gas utilities to their buildings might not be available in some locations, but also it's feasible for them to have a production kitchen that doesn't use fossil fuels. So oftentimes some people ask me, how much extra do you charge to design one of these fancy energy efficient buildings? And my response is, do you charge extra to design a beautiful building? Or is your goal to design it just beautiful enough to be allowed by law? And when you're designing the lowest performing building allowed by law, really, you're just doing minimum compliance with Title 24. It's pretty easy to go above and beyond that minimal compliance margin and design a building that is using far less energy. And that's the end of my presentation. So I think that we'll entertain questions at this point. So Laura, I'll let you direct traffic. I don't know if you want the questions to go into chat box or.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. But we're going to start with a question here in the chat. And the first one is from Lauren. For higher density development with limited roof area per unit, how is the city working with community or group-based solar as opposed to individualized solar system on each residence?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, what we're trying to do currently is go through an objective design standard to at least allow for easier development of parking lot solar. That's really challenging here in Santa Barbara because of aesthetic concerns. And so we're trying to facilitate the process more than we are doing community solar. And the reason that is the case is, A, there's just not a lot of opportunity for community solar in Santa Barbara. Like I mentioned, we're very built out. We don't have a lot of land. And because the community choice energy entity is going to be providing carbon-free electricity, we sort of see that as a better bang for your buck for those that want to go 100% carbon-free. We are trying to facilitate as much solar on the buildings as we can.
Yeah, another feature of having electric generation on the building itself is you could get away with having a battery storage unit instead of a backup generator for some uses. The Forest Service building is considering putting in battery backup, so it's kind of set up to accept that. But they don't need a generator for that because they don't have any essential facilities in that building. The county fire picks up the Forest Service fire response at another facility. But having that ability to be independent from the fluctuations in the energy grid continuity, I think is an advantage of being able to generate on site. I know a lot of our projects, Lauren asked a question about electrical vehicle charging infrastructure and what the city is doing, but I can say that individual commercial developers that are doing shopping centers are starting to take that seriously. We're working on 3 different shopping center projects that, as part of remodels or retenanting, they're looking at putting in charging stations, and there's all kinds of different purveyors of those things, some of which would pay for all the infrastructure costs and everything, and others who will allow you to pay for all the infrastructure costs and the units, and you get the percentage share of the profits depending on how much skin you have in the game on both of those options. But pretty much it's becoming part of marketing for the center to have those amenities available for people so that they'll go shopping at your shopping center. I know the Tesla charging stations just went in over at Camino Real Marketplace, and they have a thing where they put a large bank of Tesla charging stations in, but they have to be so far from the next one. So definitely coming into the realm of things. Does the city have any influencing that, Alelia?
Yeah, I mean, we would have influence. We have not yet implemented any code amendments related to increased EV charging infrastructure, though that's a great suggestion. There's still a significant cost barrier there, and so we are working on implementing our own EV infrastructure that can be publicly used. And then that's a really good suggestion for our climate action plan, though, and reaching that carbon neutrality goal.
Another interesting thing is that the systems that we're using in that Forest Service project, we recently designed a home that was fairly large where we're using the same sort of system. So every bedroom could have its own thermostat. One room could be heating while another room is cooling, and another room that maybe it's a guest room is not being used, the system could be turned off to conserve energy. You need to have a spot, a little fenced yard for sound where you're going to have your heat pump located. And it reduces the need to have a lot of independent ducts running through the house. And you can have a ERV system providing fresh air to all of the rooms continuously.
Laura, can I ask a question?
Sure, yes.
Hi, Paul and Lilia. Thank you so much for your very good presentation. My name is Sheila Hakimipour. I'm USGBC board member. I have a question. It might sounds really elementary, but the system that you just presented, Paul, what would be essentially the advantage of this system to what is just generally commonly known as splits? I mean, there are individual units in each room. The temperature is controlled. Not really, I mean, they're noisy. I have personal experience with them. So that would be the only downside of them, because it seems to be difficult to get away with that because the system is right there. So what is the differences or advantages of the system you just explained? I forgot the acronym or the name of it.
Probably variable refrigerant flow. I think a mini split system is equally efficient, but I think it can only do one or the other, and I don't think it can adjust to heat and cool independently. So it would be function more like a central system where you have a central system and a thermostat, and it's like, okay, we're getting heat now, and boom, it's just sent everywhere. Now we're cooling and it cools everywhere. And the variable refrigerant flow is able to slow the heat pump down to work at various speeds depending on the demand that's put on it. So it'd be where if you're having more zones than one, it would make more sense. It's obviously more expensive too to put that sort of system in, but there is an enhancement in user comfort, even on a residential system. The advantages of user comfort become a value added as opposed to just the same thing that I had at my old house. Central air. I'm either getting heat or I'm getting cool, and I'm having a battle with the people who like it super hot versus the people who like it a little bit cooler. And this way, each person can just totally modulate the temperature so it's right in that sweet spot for them, or you can turn it off if those areas of the building or space aren't being used.
So you mentioned the cost. What is the comparison for the cost? That was my second question, between the traditional system and this system, first as far as in the aspect of the installation cost, and then also as for the energy usage cost over the time.
Well, when combined with the solar system, I think we had a 10-year payback on the solar system for the Forest Service project. So that means after 10 years, the system will have been paid for itself and you'll be making the money on the power that you would have been using and paying the utility after that period of time. As far as installation cost up front, again, it depends if you're going to put in a ducted split system or a non-ducted split system. So the individual cassette units are a small unit that you just put in the ceiling of a room, and there's no ducting other than the ERV ducting that you need for the fresh air. So it's hard to compare it. I don't have the numbers at the top of my head in terms of what would it be to do a standard conventional economizer rooftop package gas unit versus an all electric VRF system. You're obviously going to have more individual pieces of equipment in each room with control wiring and thermostats, but you're going to have a great reduction in the amount of ductwork you need to put in and a reduction in the number of registers potentially if you don't use the ducted mini split systems. If noise is an issue, you'll probably want to remotely locate the unit and run ducts to the room so that the distance between the register and the fan in the unit is a little bit greater. But those things they operate pretty quietly. I don't know if you've ever, I recently vacationed down in Mexico when they had the huge Thomas fire here 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I went to Puerto Vallarta and I was like, my God, look at this. Every room has a mini split system in it. You know, they each had to have a separate heat pump and they had the fan coil on the wall, and it was just like shooting hot or cool out depending on what you needed. And it's super efficient and very inexpensive and easy to retrofit when you just slap it on the wall, but you can definitely build them in where they're recessed in the ceiling, or there's a unit above a closet that's serving a whole master suite. And it becomes a value added in residential luxury construction, I would say. And for smaller practical homes where maybe you're retrofitting a wall heater, that's a just non-air circulating heater that's just pumping heat into the space and maybe heating the top 2 feet of the air in the room, it's way more efficient to just pop a cartridge unit in there in the ceiling that's doing supply, stirring the air up and returning it right back into the bottom and operating more efficiently.
Right. I think we had Lauren and then Greg had a question.
Oh, you know, so I love what you guys are talking about. And just as a way, a little bit of introduction. I mean, Paul and I have known each other forever, but I'm an architect practicing in Fresno. I'm also a lead consultant, currently consulting on a project in Fresno for Department of Water Resources of all things. And I can show you how we're hitting 45% energy reduction on a concrete tilt-up utilitarian building. So anything is possible. But the other thing that I also do is I also teach at Fresno State, and I teach both codes and sustainability in the construction management program. So these are things that you're hitting on, all these things that are subjects that I could probably talk everybody blue in the face for the next 3 weeks on, you know, without interruption. But I really am very fascinated and interested in what Santa Barbara is doing with the REACH codes. You know, I mean, I teach on REACH codes. I'm interested in REACH codes. Paul, that's a fabulous building, by the way. I really love it, and I think you guys did some great stuff with it. But part of my questioning came from the fact that just understanding, having a complete understanding of how the process works for the city to actually put a reach code into place and everything, and know that that's not an easy task in and itself. I think your goals are really ambitious, and I really like what you're doing. And of course, there's as you may well acknowledge, there's a million nuances to this. So, how are we dealing with these little things? And I could, but I was really interested in the couple of questions I already asked, really hitting on this idea of one of the things that we've been discussing a lot, especially here in the Fresno area, is this idea of community solar, where we have groups of residences, rather than trying to mount solar on each building. Now we're having a community solar system that services all the buildings, and you have this really unique property relationship with how do these people own a portion of this community solar, and especially when we start to remote the solar. So now we're putting solar out in a former farm field that's 5 miles from the residential complex, and yet each one of those residences owns a small portion of that particular solar array. So I know that Santa Barbara is a fairly compact city, and I know you're fairly built out. So it's just kind of some of these bigger questions as we move out into the valley. Of course, we have a lot more room. You guys are kind of really ahead of the game in terms of this reach code thing and what you're trying to do. And so I'm just trying to kind of focus on how would we scale up what you're doing to, to a Fresno area, Fresno Clovis area, which is the 4th largest metropolitan area in the state, between the 2 and 5th largest city in the state in Fresno. And how do we scale up what you're trying to do to start developing our own reach codes here?
So Alelia, would a aggregator of power be able to accept power from a entity like Lauren's talking about, and then deliver that power to Edison or PG&E to then deliver it to the clients if they got on a community energy situation like the city of Santa Barbara is doing, and like all the aggregated counties outside of Santa Barbara are doing?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what they're doing. And in Fresno, you're probably better situated to build utility scale solar arrays that a CCA could take advantage of. But you had a few questions in there. So I wanted to handle how we're doing it first. In the process, there are 2 processes for developing a reach code, which was news to me at the beginning of this process, because we had done a reach code before, which is where you're amending Title 24, you're taking it to council, it's valid for that code cycle, and then you have to re-up it at the end of the 3-year code cycle. There's what's not new, but there's a different approach that's happening now in some parts of the state that leverages a city's policing powers and creates a public health and safety prohibition of natural gas infrastructure. And that is the approach we're taking. And so it's implementing an ordinance. It literally changes our municipal code to say there will be no natural gas infrastructure implemented on any new construction except restaurants, laboratories, and clean rooms, or a public interest project that can prove it cannot do a single fuel building. And so really the name of the game for us, Lauren, in answer to your question, was keep it as simple as possible. And if you see our ordinance draft, which we're taking to ordinance committee in 2 weeks, it is very simple. It establishes a definition for new construction. It establishes where in the entitlement process this applies to in the first year. And then it establishes several very limited exemptions, and that's it. The benefit to that pathway is twofold. One, it does not need to go through CEC review, though that's not a bad thing, but it's a nice, you eliminate that step. And then 2, it does not sunset every 3 years. So it's in place until we remove it. And that is a huge benefit to us because administratively that 3-year re-up is a big administrative burden.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how we're doing it here. If you were to do the reach code approach, you have to have 2 public hearings, you have to have the CEC approve your language, you have to prove cost effectiveness, which other entities do for you statewide. And so there's just more steps, and then you have to do it all over again in 3 years, or in our case, we would have to do it again in 1.5 years. But that was that question. In terms of community solar, we did when council adopted its 100% renewable electricity goal for the entire community, we looked at all of the solar potential in the city, including community solar. And again, there just isn't land for it here. And so we reviewed in terms of single, family residence and small commercial, could we accommodate our load? And for the most part, we can. On smaller scale units, yes, that's not as cost effective, but that's where our ability lies. And then to Paul's point, that's really where we pivoted was, all right, well, as a city, we can really get bulk and scale by building larger scale renewables. At first, we'll be contracting inland where it's cheaper to get. But as our revenues increase and we have more money to invest in our community, we will build that locally. And then people will be off takers just by nature of having an electrical account. And so it's a lot less complex than a community solar project, which requires substantial subscription before you even build it. And so it's really complicated to get off the ground.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know. I mean, I really do appreciate the approach that you're taking to it, because as you mentioned, that is one of the thornier issues that you run into, that particular development cycle type of deal. And yeah, no, that's great stuff. I mean, I'm really impressed with what you're doing, and that's a very interesting approach, doing it through community public policing. That's an interesting approach. I'm sure that approach is met with some skepticism on certain parts of the community as well.
Not in Santa Barbara.
Really?
It was, we are not first. Berkeley and San Francisco both did it first. So we had a lot of, they did the pioneering work there. But yeah, no, it's allowed. And in Santa Barbara, we're fortunate that our community is generally very supportive of this kind of action.
Isn't San Luis Obispo is on community choice, and I think that Goleta, Carpinteria, and all the unincorporated areas of Santa Barbara County are coming online in October of this year. Is that right, Alelia?
Right, a
separate community choice aggregator has picked up those areas. So it will be a matter of time if the Central Valley becomes supportive of that sort of intermediary to select where the power is coming from and allow the utility to be the distributor of the power. Then it's inserting a third party to make sure that the power sourcing is as green as it can be and as fossil free as it can be.
Yeah, and community choice is definitely getting discussed in the Valley, and the Climate Center is active to try to talk to local decision makers to make this happen. Alelia, I know you have to go.
I have to go.
Okay.
Thank you,
well, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I wanted to mention on the discussion of community choice energy to just keep your eyes open for the Fresno County Rural Transit Agency, who are conducting a study on the grid in Fresno County currently. And they're also looking to do a study on microgrids and opportunities for community choice solar to provide the energy that we need for all the EV cars that are getting on the road. And the Fresno County Rural Transit Agency is planning on being 100% EV by 2025. So that's just tomorrow. So they definitely need to have more energy there.
One other thing real quick, Laura.
Yes.
I think that the task for any municipality, whether it's a county or a city, to adopt this kind of a reach code might seem like a daunting task if you were isolated out in your own silo and you had to start from scratch to generate the documentation required for the California Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission in California. But these cities are all working together. So the groundwork that Alelia has laid in terms of writing the ordinance and making her presentations to the city council and generating the community choice power option. The city decided to do their own instead of getting on the bandwagon with some of these other people that are doing them independently of the cities. I think that they're sharing information city to city that's making the lift not quite as hard, and each person's able to do it more effectively and improving on the individual ordinances. And I have to say, Alelia is probably the one who has taken the work that's been done by other cities and really distilled it down to its primary essence and crafted a very good ordinance for our city based on the work that had been done by other folks. So all these different cities are sharing information. So if you in the Central Valley find some cities that are seriously interested in about it, I would reach out to Alelia because she'd be happy to share her research with you folks, as she has offered to City of San Diego and some of the other places along the coast, Southern California.
All right, wonderful, Paul. And Alelia agreed also to share her presentation. So I'll send this as a follow-up. And Paul, would it be possible to share your presentation as well with our audience?
Yeah, I'll convert it to a PDF so the fonts don't get funky, but yes, I'll do that.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for the great conversation. I think you'll all get our newsletter, so I hope to see you at other presentations. And Ellen, it was great to collaborate with you. I think there's a lot of overlap between our organizations, so hopefully we can do that again in the future. Thank you so much, Paul, Alelia, and everybody that could make it. If you have any follow-up question, just shoot them to me per email. And you also have Paul and Alelia's email addresses in their presentation. So with that said, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Paul.
Yeah, good to see you, Lauren. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.